What's up, everybody? Welcome to Street Apologist Live. My name is Vocab Malone. How y'all doing? Let me get a better camera angle so I don't look as chubby. The time is about 4 minutes after 7 o'clock here in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I broadcast from. The date is already January 29th. 2019. Can you believe it? It's almost the end of January. It's very, very hard to believe for me. Don't worry, guys. I'm turning down the music. I know it was a little loud there in the beginning. So, let me give a shout out to the live chat and tell the live chat, what's up, y'all? It's great to see you. You guys are the bomb. You're the reason this thing can happen. Grab this link right now. Grab this link, please, to this show and share it. You guys got Twitter accounts. You guys are on Instagram. You're on Snapchat. You're on Facebook. You're on whatever else is out there. I don't know off the top of my head right now. But grab it and share it, please. And then also be sure to hit the thumbs up button. And the mod squad people, the regulars, the street apologist squad up in the house. When people come in, tell them the rules real quick. You know what I'm saying? Let them know the rules. And then also make sure to remind them to hit that like button as well and grab the link and share it. Well, I'm very excited about today's program. We're going to have somebody on that I've seen around a while. He's done all kinds of debates, all kinds of dialogues. He's pretty active online. He's made his presence and voice known and heard throughout the internet, especially on YouTube. But I first caught him when actually he was doing some stuff giving the Black Hebrew Israelites a heck of a time. And well, I don't want to say that, man. I want to say something that the Hebrew Israelites will quote later on. So I won't quote that. I won't say that. But I will say this, that I appreciate his work and his style and his personality. Obviously, we are not going to see eye to eye, not just on everything, but on what I would say is the most important thing. He may have a different view on that, but that's not really what we're going to be talking about tonight. With Rabbi Asher Meza, we're going to be talking about why Jews, and I'm going to say Christians too, should reject Kabbalah. Welcome to Street Apologist Live, my man, Rabbi Asher Meza. How you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Seen a lot of your videos, a lot of good stuff. The information against Islam. You're doing a work that many people, I don't think, are courageous enough to do. And I appreciate what you do.
Yeah, we thought it'd be funny in that I appreciate, because we talked a little bit about this. You're talking about the Islamicize Me stuff and exploring Islam that's running right now on Facebook. We thought it'd be funny to have the doctor that the guys who are becoming Muslims go see, the doctor be an actual Jewish person. So he's my friend Jeff Cran, who's a Messianic Jew, wears the Star of David and everything. And we thought it'd be funny to just let the irony of these guys who are saying all this anti-Semitic stuff throughout the series not notice almost that they have a Jewish doctor the whole time. We thought it'd be funny. So the doctor they go to, because the reason they have to go to the doctor, Asher, is because they're drinking camel urine. Right. They're thinking that eating ajwa dates gives them immunity from poison and stuff like this.
So historically, Salah ad-Din, his doctor was the Rambam.
Oh, that's good. Right. Now, I know what you're talking about, but explain to everybody. You just said Rambam. That's an abbreviation. Who is the Rambam?
He's also known by the name Maimonides. His name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. It's an acronym, Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. He was born in 1135 of the Common Era, died in 1205. And he was the personal physician for anyone who's seen the Kingdom of Heaven of Salah ad-Din. He was the greatest jihadist of his time. But
that's a funny way to describe him, but I got you, bro. No, that's true, and that's interesting, and that kind of concept is why we thought it'd be funny. All right, so let's tell people where to find your stuff before we get into the topic of today. A couple websites I'll mention that I know that you're involved with are bejewish.org.
They all point now to one website, TorahJudaism.com, and I have all my videos there. Like most people on the right, my page almost got deleted off of YouTube. Yeah, this is happening to a lot of people, so this encouraged me to download all my videos and put them on my own server.
Do you know what the reason was, with your case particularly?
It started with a lot of my Islamic stuff. For some reason, that just raised red flags with YouTube.
Were your messages like this, where they're like, this video like violates international law or something like that? Is that the...
No. It was community standards that I was violating. Eventually, all things having to do with religion are going to have to be on private servers. So I started off early just in case they close my YouTube account. 'Cause, they give you 3 strikes. After the 3rd strike, they close your account. And I have over 800 lectures. I couldn't allow that. So then I created a website, an additional website from all my other websites, TorahJudaism.com, and I put all my videos and videos that I endorse from other teachers on there. If you want to check out my stuff, go to TorahJudaism.com.
My goal in life is to build as many YouTube subscribers as I can until they take away my channel.
Right. Yeah,
that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah. So they're doing it with the Dennis Prager as well. We were speaking about Dennis Prager before. They're putting all his videos on the restricted list, which means that he can't monetize them, where they can't be shown in schools or in libraries. So, I mean, there's a war against the religious right in the world, not just this country.
Right. Let's see. I want to make sure. Are there any other websites? Well, your YouTube channel. People just look up Rabbi Asher Meza on YouTube. Faith on the Line is the name of the live streams and stuff you do, and you're pretty easy to find there. So guys, check his stuff out there. And you got conversations with Messianic Jews, conversations with Karaite Jews,
everything, Samaritans, atheists, Muslims. I was telling you earlier that I love when people dialogue, because it's easy to spew a lot of nonsense when you're just giving over a monologue. But when you're getting every sentence checked by your opponent or by your guest, it helps you reveal the truth and make sense of all this instead of just having someone never challenged. So, I mean, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate people who have the courage to do it. All of us who do this, that when we come out successful, it's luck, that we don't know what to expect. But I always tell people that I'm not married to any religion. I've been Jewish for the last 20 years, so I don't think I'm going anywhere else. But I would convert to Islam. I would convert to Christianity tomorrow, like if it would make me a better person, if it would make this world a better place. And I think everyone, when confronting religion, should have that approach to be moldable. And that goes for anyone. So whether you're a black Hebrew, a Jehovah's Witness, a Muslim, you can't be married to any one belief system just because you happen to be born into it or just because it's convenient. You always have to want to grow, aspire to greater things. I appreciate this style of dialogue.
Yeah, I think we'll have a good conversation tonight, and hopefully we can do some stuff more in the future. One last thing on your channel that's interesting. Your most popular video is in Spanish, and I'm going to give the translation. A Jew disproves Christianity in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's an old video. It's actually a translation from one I made in English, and that one's been translated in a bunch of different languages, yeah.
And then number 2 is A Jew disproves the Black Hebrew Israelites.
Right. It sounds like you don't like them much.
Well, no, Hebrew Israelites. So that's kind of like my specialty in apologetics. I don't dislike them as people. I love them. Now, they don't like to have dialogue with me because I do criticize their doctrine and their behavior because they claim to be students of the Bible, and that includes ethical standards. So because I criticize that from a biblical perspective, they do not like me. They accuse me of being a government agent, an Edomite, sometimes an Amalekite, the reincarnation of someone evil in a previous life, all kinds of crazy stuff like that, you know. They've accused me of being they've accused me of being a secret Jew. I'm part Sicilian. I'm not Jewish. If I was, I would say I was Jewish. You know what I mean? But I'm not. But they accuse me of being a secret Jew and all this kind of stuff. So
I was the assistant chaplain in Petersburg Federal Prison in Virginia, and Black Hebrew Israelites are taking over the prisons, man. Our group, like we were leading the Yom Kippur service, we had like 17 guys, and then in the chapel next door, you had like 300, 400 Black Hebrew Israelites, and they're growing by the day. And the problem with Judaism is that most Jews don't proselytize and don't care to proselytize. Now, I believe in proselytizing.
Right.
But Black Hebrews do proselytize. I mean, that's what they're known for, right? I mean, standing in the corner of Times Square.
Yes, proselytizing, a.k.a. cursing out young children and pointing at people.
Well, I mean, it's a tactic that works. Just
Apparently.
Like 9/11 caused a year with the most converts to Islam that the U.S. ever saw, right? You know, for some reason, this works.
Power. It's power-based religion, which is almost Nietzschean. You know, it's not even based on truth or veracity. It's based upon almost to me, almost an evolutionary concept that is pragmatic use of all that's left is the will to power. And some of these religions, I do think that's what I see. Well, okay, let's let's get into this. Everybody in the live chat, be sure to share this video. I think you can tell we got a good rapport. And again, I appreciate all that you do and all that stuff. And so let's do this. So we're going to talk about Kabbalah today. And it's funny, some of the Hebrew Israelites, actually, not all, some of them, especially what are called the Tanakh-only Hebrew Israelites, because most of them are New Testament in the sense that they affirm in some way Jesus as Messiah most. But there's a steady stream of Tanakh-only Hebrew Israelites. Some of them get into the mystical traditions there, and they do hold the Kabbalah. Now, that's not a major thing. It's just something I'm kind of mentioning since we're talking about Hebrew Israelites. But we have this thing called Kabbalah. Most people, the first time they heard about it, as far as in the West, it came on their radar when they heard Madonna was into it, Britney Spears was into it, and maybe they heard of a couple other celebrities.
Demi Moore. Right.
Yeah, Ashton Kutcher, Demi Moore apparently had some affinity to it. And so sometimes they've heard some of that, and I think most people have a general idea of it's something mystical, hidden, secret form of Judaism, and I don't know if too much more is generally known as far as if you just said, what's Kabbalah? Now, this is going to be tricky, but Asher, can you define Kabbalah for us as best you can?
Right. Well, to start off, I don't want to misrepresent the Jewish people here. I would say around 97% of the Jewish world has embraced Kabbalah. Okay, and I belong to a small segment of the Orthodox community that is mainly made up of Yemenite Jews. Now, Yemenite Jews are the Jews that could trace their lineage furthest back that we know of today. Within the Temani community, the Yemenite community, there's a group called Baladim who never embraced Kabbalah. In other words, they never embraced the central book of Kabbalah, which was known as the Zohar. And people who do not believe in Kabbalah in the Jewish world are big on the Rambam. Why are they big on the Rambam? Because the Rambam existed before Kabbalah was either revealed, invented, published, which was in 1270 of the Common Era. Now, the word Kabbalah just means transmission in Hebrew. It doesn't mean anything mystical. And it's interesting how they name it transmission, because the claim is that this is a mystical transmission or tradition that was passed down from teacher to student all the way going back to Moses. The primary book of Kabbalah, the Zohar, claims to be written by the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Can we stop there for a second?
Sure.
Because I'm just, not to interrupt you, but I want to break this down as much as we can. So everyone here's what he's talking about so far. So Kabbalah is a certain mystical understanding and view of the Hebrew scriptures and tradition that has various permutations, but you definitely, I think, need to at least understand that it's mystical. And what Asher said, which from my understanding is true, most of mainstream Judaism in some way or another has embraced a lot of Kabbalah tenets or aspects, and he is saying that he is part of something, the Yemenite Jews, who have never embraced Kabbalah. And now when I interrupted him, what he was talking about is the source of Kabbalah as far as the text, which is the Zohar. And the Zohar claimed to go back to the 2nd century, and actually some of them push it back further with these, hidden oral traditions type of thing. But, one aspect is these revelations given to someone in the 2nd century, but it wasn't recorded or revealed or written until later. So I'm just kind of trying to summarize what you're saying. Is that a good job?
Yes.
Continue on and explain it to us.
So we consider the Zohar pseudepigrapha, and that concept was one almost developed within the Jewish world. Christians also have books like the Gospel of Barnabas, of Judas, of Peter, right?
Yes.
It's a way for people to get their ideas canonized with the pen of divine inspiration.
Right.
And the Zohar is not the only book in the Jewish world that does this. For example, there's a book called Sefer Yetzirah that they claim was written by Avraham. I'm sure if you discuss with a lot of Karaite Jews, Flat Earth and Lunar Sabbath believers, that you've heard of the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch.
Yes, actually, a lot of Hebrew Israelites, let me be precise, a specific sect of the Hebrew Israelites called GOCC, the Gathering of Christ Church. They embrace Jubilees and Enoch in their canon. It's funny you mention that. And there's also a significant portion of Hebrew Israelites who are flat earthers. Now, let me explain a few things he just said there. Pseudepigrapha, everybody. That basically means where you attribute falsely a writing to someone else and you use their name. And when he spoke about that in Christianity, there's something that is called the Epistle of Barnabas that was written long after Barnabas, the actual person who would have lived during the New Testament era, was alive, meaning he was dead. Same thing with something called the Gospel of Peter, which I've read from on this show. If you guys remember, there's a time where I went through substantial portions of the Gospel of Peter, showing how it didn't even have an affiliation with legitimate expressions of Christianity. Well, loose affiliation, let me put it that way. But it also had no affiliation with Peter. And so he's saying that these writings he's mentioning are also pseudepigraphal, so false attributions that the person didn't really write. That's what he's saying there. I'm just trying to make sure we explain it, because I'm looking at the live chat and almost everybody's like, "Hey, this is interesting, but this is new territory for me."
Sure.
So I'm just like trying to hold everyone's hand step by step. But keep on going. You're doing great.
Actually, pseudepigrapha happens currently. The most famous book that people who deal with the end times in the Jewish world read from is a book called Kol HaTorah, which is a book that was found right after the Six-Day War, around 1968, and they claim that it was written by the Vilna Gaon. But what's important is that it's still happening today. People are building doctrine, they're building metaphysical ideas of something that we don't really know who wrote, right? And ultimately, it's really not important who wrote it, even if these people did write it. Even if Enoch wrote the book of Enoch, which is, I mean, if you know when Enoch existed, I mean, that even predates Torah, it predates Abraham. The central text of Judaism has always been the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, right? And anything outside of that could either be accepted or rejected, but what validates it as true is if it brings you back to the source. The source being the 5 books of Moses, and it doesn't ultimately contradict the source. So that's why if someone is firmly grounded in Torah, all these things will fall away. And I'm pretty sure from a Christian perspective that you can have the same approach towards the Gospels. As long as it doesn't contradict the initial message laid down in the Gospels, it could still stand. But these books typically always contradict and add to the source material to such an extent that their followers break off and end up creating new religions and end up with a religion that doesn't resemble the religion they started with. And this is why this is dangerous. Well, like I said, the word Kabbalah doesn't necessarily mean mysticism. Colloquially, it's used like that, but mysticism predated the 13th century. There's mysticism in the Talmud. Yeshua and the followers of Yeshua peddled mystical ideas of the time. There's many mystical books that were found in the caves of Qumran. But back then, the word that was used was Gnosticism.
It's funny you just said that. Someone in the live chat just said, this sounds a bit like Gnosticism. Right. So some Christians, especially if they've done any study of early church history, know something about Gnosticism, as it's one of the first heresies that the Christians had to wrestle with. And it looks like probably in some of the books, maybe 1 John especially, which dealt with Docetism, which may be considered a form of proto-Gnosticism. In some of the books of the New Testament, there might have been some wrestlings with Gnostic ideas, but definitely when you
like
get
the infancy gospel of James, I think. I mean, there's many books that were excluded because of that. But it was really a form of what we call nowadays Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. Now, mysticism in itself is not bad, okay? It's not necessarily good either. It could be either good or bad. But the term that people toss around too easily is the term divinely inspired. What does that really mean? To a Jew, the only divinely inspired text is the 5 books of Moses. And now, the Torah endorses the office of the prophet to bring people back to the 5 books of Moses. So anything we find outside the 5 books of Moses, with the Psalms, the writings, even the words of the prophets, if they don't amplify Torah, if they don't bring you back to Torah, then they're failing in their mission. So that's how one remains grounded and on the right path. You understand? Because if not, who's to stop anyone from just creating a new religion tomorrow on a book that they wrote a week ago?
Right. So that's funny you mentioned that. One of the early church fathers made fun of the Gnostics, where he said, we've got 4 Gospels. The Gnostic heretics got a whole bunch because we've got them from the accounts of the eyewitnesses. The Gnostics go to sleep that night, have a dream or a vision, and come the next morning and to share with their fellow Gnostics, hey guys, look, I've got a brand new revelation. And it becomes, this imparted secret knowledge or wisdom to them that they all accept. Now, this is interesting. I want to bring something in from the live chat real quick. Someone said Kabbalah is not really that important. It's a side topic. And someone's asked me, why are you even on this topic? Let me answer, and then I'll see what your answer would be.
Sure.
To me, I always think that we need to be aware of cultural trends to a certain extent, especially, maybe what you might call religious trends. And Kabbalah certainly became that in the past, 10 to 20 years in America. And I think that's important. I think it's also important, this is my perspective, Asher can give his perspective, to recognize the amount of permutation of something really not even biblical in a lot of ways into modern-day Judaism with Kabbalah, meaning Kabbalah infiltrates in a lot of ways modern Judaisms, it seems, and yet I think you look at a lot of the concepts and things and say, this doesn't really seem biblical. And I think that's important as well. Also, I think it's important for us to tie this in, if we're looking at it from a Christian perspective, Gabriel, you were one of the people asking, to Gnosticism, which Gnosticism is something that early Christians battle with. So this relates to early church history and something that I don't think will ever go away. I mean, it's true the New Age might not be as popular as it was in the 70s, but that doesn't mean it's gone away. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. You guys should Google a place called Sedona, Arizona. People take trips up there all the time to get in the center of vortexes and to play around with certain waterfalls or water streams of water, and to get healing through crystals and all these kinds of New Age mystical things. And a lot of times the New Age almost is trans-religious. Now, I'm not saying that it should be or that's acceptable, but New Age concepts will kind of almost graft onto whatever other religious background the person has, and they kind of just blend it all together. And we're just kind of drawing attention to that, and to a certain extent criticizing it, as well as I think these topics are interesting. You notice how we're going all the way back to the medieval era. Isn't it important to understand sort of the development of Judaism? I think that's important. Isn't it important to understand the development of these concepts? I do think that's important. So that's why. What about with you?
Isn't it a bit hard to attack Kabbalah when I think Kabbalistic texts almost endorse Christianity or make an allowance for it, just because Christianity was one of these mystical/pseudo sects of the first century that made it famous, right, or made it big and didn't ultimately die out. In other words, there's a lot of metaphysical ideas, developed metaphysical ideas, that are the basis of Christianity that really weren't endorsed by earlier texts. Things that many rabbis of the time considered also heretical. So this is why the average Messianic Jew nowadays is probably more into Kabbalah than the average Orthodox Jew, because he finds texts that speaks about God in a corporeal fashion, in a pluralistic fashion, like the 10 Sefirot, like the 10, I don't know, like, have you ever seen these Kabbalistic drawings that split up God into 10 segments or 10 emanations, right? Yes. Now, that is not too far off from the Trinity. I'm not sure how you hold it with the doctrine of the Trinity, but there's a lot of these concepts.
Yeah. I'm fully Trinitarian. I'm
right.
Fully Trinitarian.
So that in itself could be classified as Kabbalistic. It's hard for me to understand why.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's
Sure.
talk about that.
Sure.
So what he was referring to there just a second ago, everybody, is something that folks who study Kabbalah call the tree of life. And the tree of life is sort of drawn with these little circles, and it almost looks, you could draw sort of the figure of a person over top of it. There's a way the structure is laid out if you wanted to. These 10 little circles that each have sort of an aspect or an emanation of the divine or God, who in Kabbalah is called like the nothingness or something like that. Not that he is nothing, but that he is no thing, I guess is supposed to be the idea with that. And so within that, sometimes what you'll hear even in maybe from Messianic Jews who accept Jesus as Messiah is, well, look at this. Kabbalah is trying to answer the question of how the transcendent God interacts with his creation. It's dealing with the problem of the transcendent and the immanent aspects of God, who is not part of the created order. Like, if you look at a lot of the other false gods, they're stuck in the universe themselves, meaning they appear to be a part of it or come out of it or derive from it. They're not above it or transcendent. with Judaism and Christianity, you have a different understanding of God, and it says he creates order. However, he's involved in his creation. And you see that with the prophets. You see that, I would say, actually through the theophanies in the Old Testament. And as a Christian, obviously, I would say ultimately you see that through when the Word himself came and dwelt among men, John 1. And so I understand that Kabbalah is trying to answer that. But I think it creates problems along the way, especially when you get down to the 10th aspect or emanation or whatever we're going to call it within Kabbalah, because then it, I think, misdefines the Shekinah as a feminine aspect of God. And that's problematic for me, and I think we would agree on that point. But the reason why I would be wanting to stay against it is because ultimately, even if it's pragmatic value for apologetics, I want to look at the truth value. Now, you and I would disagree. I don't agree that Christianity was sort of this, use the word pseudo, a pseudo sect that didn't die off. Obviously, we disagree with it because historically, what I saw is by and large when someone who's a Messiah dies, killed, failed, almost always, there's rare exceptions, the movement around him ends. Christianity is this weird, strange exception by and large with that. And I think it actually is within a faithful strand of Judaism. I find what Jesus was doing exceptionally more Jewish in a lot of ways than what I think the Sadducees were doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Sadducees are not denying the resurrection. They're denying other, I think, things that are clearly in the text, for example. So I think that Jesus is calling people back to the God of, Torah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But here's the difference. The way he's doing it is by calling people to him. And, of course, that's going to be a point of contention. But that's why. And also, what Kabbalah does with angels and the devil himself is decidedly odd to me and problematic. So that's another reason why I would essentially tell Christians, not that you can't study it, here we are kind of studying it today, but not to embrace it in the sense of like a practice for spiritual formation. I think it lessens the wickedness of Satan, and in Christianity we do have a personal Satan. I think it lessens really how evil or wicked he is, and I think it becomes obsessed with angels and demons in a way that I think might be a little unhealthy. So those are some of my perspective. But what's your perspective on those things I just said there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that Christianity demystified is Christianity no longer. I mean, all these concepts, whether you're mentioning angels, demons, pluralism, are Gnostic concepts that aren't necessarily in Torah. In other words, everything mystical has its root somewhere in Torah, whether it's an ambiguous statement or some sort of foreshadowing. Not necessarily in Torah, but Tanakh in general, and the prophets, the writings, and many times Torah itself. There are ideas that become developed later on. For example, the Zohar was started off just as a commentary on the 5 books of Moses, but It took every story and gave it a mystical twist. Right? Mm-hmm. Pluralism is not a tenet of the believers of the God of Israel, or Israel of the time, or Judaism.
When you say pluralism, how are you defining pluralism there?
The belief that there is a power of good fighting a power of evil. Almost like the belief of those who follow Zoroaster, of Ahura Mazda. It's not one clearly laid down in the Torah. Now, the instance that Satan, for example, does appear, that I believe these ideas were extracted from, is that instance in Job.
So Job 1, he appears with the angels, and there's a conversation there with the accuser. So, well, let me ask you, so do you believe in a personal Satan?
No, not at all. Well, first of all, like the notion of Satan doesn't appear in the 5 books of Moses. This is later on. The book of Job was introduced much, much later. As a matter of fact, the whole canon as we have it nowadays was really canonized even after the death of Jesus. In the Talmud, it speaks of Rabbi Akiva arguing for them to include the book of Ezekiel, the book of Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, because they were going to exclude it. For example, the house of Shammai would never accepted the book of Esther as part of their canon. All they had was the Torah. So when you have a notion of a powerful one, i.e. a God with a small g, fighting against the almighty, powerful God that like one could even say that the universe is within him, then you're creating a pluralistic reality that is not endorsed by the Torah.
Well, I know the concept you're talking about. I've usually heard that referred to as dualism.
Oh, dualism, yes.
But I would say that Christianity is not dualistic in a Zoroastrian sense, because it's not like Satan and devil, or I'm sorry, the devil and God are two sides of the same coin or anything like that. Because a general Christian understanding is that who is Satan? He's a created being. Mm-hmm. And so as a created being, he literally is contingent upon Yahweh. So his very existence is owed to Yahweh. He depends on Yahweh for his very existence. Mm-hmm. There's no battle, but there is, according to my understanding of Scripture, there is a decree of God or plan of God in which Satan plays a role that God has actually ordained. And so because of that, here he is. But it's not because things are out of control or there's pockets of resistance that Yahweh can't get a hold of or anything like that. So I wouldn't see it as dualism. It seems like it's because he's a created being. So you don't believe in a personal Satan. You think that's more from Kabbalah. But who do you think what do you think is happening in Genesis 3 in the garden? Okay, go ahead.
In terms of a created being, even in Greek and Roman mythology, there was typically one superior god, either Zeus or Apollo, and then all these sub-gods that would war amongst each other. Now, the notion of dualism is not necessarily that you have two almighty gods in some way kind of duking it out, but you have an array of different gods that you can utilize as your personal celestial butler, right? Claiming to have free will to, in some way, challenge the authority of gods bigger than them or lower than them, and many times they behave worse than people do, right? I mean, dualism just limits it to two, but I've always thought that dualism is ultimately a form of polytheism, right? Because according to the Torah, all there is God. In terms of Genesis chapter 3, the way the average Jew would interpret that, the serpent is typically understood as man's evil inclination. In other words, because man has free will, he can choose not to follow God. He ultimately has no metaphysical abilities to challenge God or the spiritual status quo, which is what a God with a little g would have. In other words, not having no gods before me means anyone with actual metaphysical power. Satan, demons, concepts that Kabbalah does embrace, but the Torah doesn't endorse.
Well, it's funny, though, you just said something. You said the evil inclination, Yetzer Hara.
No, man's evil inclination.
Right. Words, no, I know what you're talking about, but
it doesn't exist like a separate entity.
Well, but I mean, even that concept, like that has some background, is my understanding, within Kabbalah, doesn't it? The evil inclination.
Well, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov,
Talmudic as well.
Which means just your inclination to want to do good and what Christians call the flesh or your carnal side. Now, many people have run with that, and there's actually a statement in the Talmud that says the Satan, the angel of death, and the evil inclination are one. There are many midrashic statements, in other words, mystical ideas thrown around there. There's something monolithic laid down. But that just shows you how mysticism and Gnosticism and dualism was a big part of the rabbis of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries.
Like, it would be two things. So, like, Jeremiah says that the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can know it? You know what I'm saying? Jeremiah says that. Mm-hmm. But then also, that doesn't mean within Christian understanding that there's not a personification of rebellion against God, who ultimately, is a fallen angel. So he's a created being. Like, that's why it's not polytheism, because he's no God in any real sense. I mean,
God just means someone with power. Like the term, to use the Hebrew.
I define it as a bit, but see, I'm not gonna. I wouldn't do that. I would have, biblical God. I understand that you can have.
Biblical God, according to Torah, with the word Elohim, which just means powerful ones. For example, the Sanhedrin are also called Elohim. Like when Jesus makes a statement, like, why do you condemn me? Like when the book of Psalms says, well, didn't I say you are gods, i.e. powerful ones? So powerful ones on a metaphysical level equals what we define as God, or
the unjust judges are called Elohim, but you, of course, would recognize Jesus is not saying they are the embodiment of Yahweh or anything like that. Wouldn't you understand Yahweh to be the one true God, the self-existent one?
If you're a believer in Torah, then that's your one true God, and anyone who claims to be a God outside of him is a false God.
Right. Well, so I hold the Torah, but that's not all I hold to. You see what I'm saying? So I do hold that Yahweh is the one true God. So Satan, he's no God at all. In fact, Paul said, behind idols are demons who are no gods at all. And that's why Paul actually uses the phrase so-called gods or false gods.
But this isn't a new concept. In Egypt, they
but
had Amun-Ra, the head of all gods. In other words, there was typically always one god and like many sub-gods. It exists like this in Indian culture as well. In other words, only because you're not denying that there's one supreme god, what does not mean that you're not a polytheist by acknowledging other metaphysical beings that have free will and power on their own to even contradict and challenge that supreme God.
Well, but the thing is, I feel we're kind of getting off what we wanted to talk about a little bit.
No problem.
But I don't mind if you don't mind a little bit. But like, the thing is, you're saying a chief supreme God. When a Christian talks about Yahweh, they're not saying he's a chief or supreme God among many kind of other godlike beings. I think really a Christian monotheism understands this. There's one true God who is self-existent. Prior to creation, he was the only one who was. There was nothing else there. So he depends on no one. That's called the aseity of God, that he needs none else. And so everything after that, everything that follows that he decides to create by his own good pleasure,
I accept
those things
that.
all depend on
I accept that, but there are certain ambiguous ideas, like why would this supreme God have to in some way then later on cast one of his angels into a lake of fire and seal it? In other words, someone is fighting against him thinking that he could win. Now, if this doesn't sound like a story right out of Greek mythology...
You're saying that the concept of Satan... Well, but do you agree that there could be... Do you agree with the understanding of the pridefulness of sin, or the sinfulness of pride, in that you can have creatures who do think they can defeat God? Let me give you a great example going back to Torah. Pharaoh saw plague after plague in which he clearly knew he was not in control of the situation. In fact, his own court magicians imitated some of the earlier plagues. I mean, you know all this. I'm saying this for the audience. I'm not acting like I'm instructing you, just so you know. I'm being very. I don't think anything like that. I'm just reiterating for the audience. The court magicians said there was a certain point where they could no longer imitate, and they said, we could do this, we could do that, but this has the fingerprint of God on it. And so there's a recognition of our power stops here, if you want to put it that way. Pharaoh sees that, and I think that's part of the reason he keeps on agreeing to it. But now the New Testament speaks about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. I think that's a biblical concept, and I think you can see that play out. What happens is, despite all evidence to the contrary, again and again, Pharaoh acts like he's going to win. He acts like he's going to defeat. And he thinks he is the embodiment of Ra, who you mentioned. He thinks he is these things. And that's why he's like, who's Yahweh that I should listen to him? So I know what you're saying, but see, that is the personification of the sinfulness of man, and that's who Satan is. So, I would have the
but Pharaoh was human. He didn't have any metaphysical abilities. Now, an angel...
But an angel doesn't either. He's a created being. An angel can't either. Satan has no choice, no chance, I mean,
according to the Gospels, like, you have the Savior of the world, who many say is God himself, after he dies, going down into the realm of Satan and freeing captives that Satan is holding and keeping them away from God himself. In other words, this is someone who's challenging God.
I don't interpret that passage that way, though, but I know what you're talking about. Some Christians do teach that, but I don't interpret that passage that way, but I got you.
All right, so Satan takes Jesus up on a mountain. In other words, this is someone who's challenging the supreme God. I mean, like, do you believe that Jesus is God himself? I'm sorry, because I never asked you that.
Yeah. So I'm fully Trinitarian. So Jesus is Yahweh embodied, which, again, I know you said some of these concepts sound pagan to you, but, like, I would point you to the Memra, the concept that the Word of God,
pagan,
or even the two powers in Second Temple Judaism. The complexity of God within still monotheism is variegated within Judaism. So I don't see, if it was pagan influence, I wouldn't be into it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, Judaism doesn't always mean from the Torah. In other words, things that were written during the first century were also called Jewish. I consider the New Testament a Jewish book, but I don't say the Torah endorses those ideas. So, but let's define a few terms here. The term pagan, at least from a Jewish perspective, is anything not endorsed by the 5 books of Moses. Anything not endorsed by Torah is considered pagan, just like anything like east of London was considered the Orient. In other words, it's not that it's necessarily bad and damaging to someone's faith to believe it. if it's pagan, like from a Torah perspective, as long as it doesn't contradict or in some way try to abolish core Torah principles. So there's many things that fall under that rubric, like you mentioned earlier, the resurrection of the dead. As you know, the Torah doesn't mention the notion of the resurrection of the dead, but people call it nowadays a Jewish idea. Even the notion of the Messiah.
Well, yeah, Daniel 12:2, resurrection of the dead is there. And notion of the Messiah, I would point to Genesis 3:15. But Asher Meza, don't you recognize that your understanding of the Jewish canon is not really what everybody thinks? For example, when you go to Josephus, what I mean is you're limiting it. You're saying pagan is anything outside of Torah, but even Josephus said, here's the books we use, and guess what? It matches the Christian understanding of the Hebrew Scriptures. You know what I'm saying?
I'm saying that only because someone calls something pagan doesn't mean that they're saying that it's idolatrous or heretical.
Right, I understand what you're saying.
That's all I'm saying. It's not that I have a different understanding. I'm laying down a systematic theology for how Judaism actually functions. First, there's Torah. I mean, the average person makes no distinction between all these books. I would say the average rabbi does. In other words, anything that's found in Torah carries more weight than something found in the book of Amos or the book of Habakkuk, right? So,
well, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure, go ahead.
If Isaiah says, "Thus saith the Lord," is he correct when he says that this is Yahweh speaking to his covenant people there, or not? Because if he's correct there, I am wondering how you can say that has a different level of weight than when Moses says, "Thus saith the Lord." It's the same Yahweh speaking through his mouthpieces. Okay.
Now, if the Torah didn't say twice, don't add or take away from these instructions, well, then I would agree with you. If the Torah didn't say in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and 13 that even a prophet can add anything new to the Torah, then I would agree with you. Now, Isaiah himself, in Isaiah chapter 8, says that if everything I speak does not shed light on the word, on the testimony, on the Torah, there's no light in my words. In other words, everything that Isaiah is bringing down has to have its source in Torah for it to be validated. The job of the prophet is only there to bring you back to Torah. But the only command that we have to listen to a prophet in Torah is Deuteronomy chapter 18, that says that when you begin to stray, God will raise up for you a prophet. And if you don't heed his words, in other words, the job of the prophet is only there to bring you back to the Torah when you begin to stray on a national level. So this is why
Deuteronomy 18 says he'll speak all that I have commanded him. So the office of prophet is established, and the thing is that this sounds like a Judaism that's only backwards looking, but when I read the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures, I see a Judaism that's also forward looking. And that's why you see these concepts that many people have spoken about way before Christianity, such as, who is this suffering servant?
That's the thing.
Spoke of Isaiah. Who is this reigning king that sits on the throne of David? That's forward-looking. That's not just something in Torah. You can't point someone to the throne of David when David hadn't existed in Torah, you know?
Because Torah doesn't endorse the notion of progressive revelation. By the simple fact that it says twice, don't add or take away from this, means that there is a safety net there to stop the possibility of offshoots coming out of this initial belief system. Because if you keep on having offshoot after offshoot and revelation after revelation, what you end up with is not going to resemble what you started off with. So this is why Judaism could protect itself. However, if everyone is going to try to interpret the prophets for themselves, right, and start building dogmatic ideas off the hyperbole, the symbolism, the poetry that appears in the prophets, well, then what you have today, thousands of denominations, each one of them condemning each other to hell because they happen not to agree or concur with their interpretation of what the prophet is telling them, when they don't even understand the original language that it's written in. And as someone who speaks and reads Hebrew, no one really knows exactly what the prophets are saying because it's so poetic, it's so hyperbolic. But what we do know is what the Torah told us in terms of prophets, that they only speak the word of God. In other words, they're reiterating, because they're not allowed to add anything new to the Torah. Even a prophet who adds to the Torah, you have to take him out and stone him. He's only there to bring you back to the Torah. I mean, it's no coincidence that every time a prophet arises in Jewish history, it's always when Israel is either about to go into exile or is already in exile and God's trying to bring them back. Either way, prophets are only sent to wicked Israel. Why? To bring them back to the Torah, to fulfill what's mentioned in Deuteronomy 27, 28, 29, and Leviticus
Well,
26.
do you think that the Israel in David's day is wicked Israel, a united kingdom under David, no pagan, or no idolatry allowed? Do you think that that's wicked Israel? Because there's prophets then. There was prophets then during the day of David, and prior to that, Saul prophesied with a school of prophets. So I guess
Right.
I hear what you're saying.
So-
I don't. Let me.
So
let
you're
me
talking
just
about
say-
Samuel. So Samuel predated David, and he was the
Right.
one who
But
anointed.
even during David's day, you have
Hold on,
Nathan as well. You have Nathan as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not disagreeing with you. The prophets called Israel. I would even maybe change it a little bit. They're not really just saying to Torah. They're calling the people of God back to their covenant with Yahweh. But I understand what you're saying, of course.
Yeah, the covenant is
Within-
the Torah covenant. I mean, what other covenant is it? I mean, the circumcision is the sign of the covenant.
That's the thing, though. That's why it's interesting to deny progressive revelation, because you have the Noahic covenant, you have the Davidic covenant, you do have multiple covenants, because covenants are progressive throughout the history of revelation. And I mean, if you see that, Noah could eat things that David couldn't. You know what I'm saying? He was allowed to eat certain things that David wasn't allowed to eat.
The only covenant given to Noah that was a covenant given to all humanity, that God wouldn't destroy the world with a flood.
Exactly.
In terms
but in
of
Genesis 9, he says you can eat every creeping thing everything that moves upon the earth. That is not kosher. And prior to that is the covenant with Adam. That's not identical. And even at Sinai, there were certain things that weren't given. For example, the tassels, that wasn't given until later. There's things that were progressively given. But I mean, I
don't think anyone believes that the whole Torah was given on Mount Sinai. It began on Mount Sinai, and it ceased right before the book of Deuteronomy, which is known as the repetition of the law. In other words, the Abrahamic covenant is connected to the Torah covenant. Now, that's the only national covenant that God made with Israel. In terms of personal covenants, like covenants or a salt covenant, even though like the word Brit may be used, I mean, just like the word priest may be used in the scriptures to refer to pagan priests, like the Kohanim of Baal, it's not speaking about the same idea. In other words, there's only one national covenant with Israel and God, that Israel would keep his commandments and they would be his people and God would be their God. I mean,
but I promise that you'll always have a man who will sit upon the throne, Yahweh says to David, right?
Right.
That's not in the Torah, yet do you deny that Yahweh said that to David?
That really is optional to believe. I mean, the Torah does
Really?
not... Absolutely. Well, the Torah doesn't endorse any other book to be written outside of the books that he commissioned Moses to write. It teaches that Moses wrote 13 Sifrei Torah, Torah scrolls. Now, there's books that the rabbis themselves wrote, and the Talmud says this, that it was the court of Hezekiah that wrote around 98% of what we consider Nach today, the prophets and the writings. Of course, people nowadays, especially in the Karaite and Christian camp, they lump them all in together. But this is really a Catholic invention. A Jew would never combine the Torah alongside the books of the prophets or the writings. Why?
Wait. Josephus does have an Old Testament canon that matches the Christian canon long before the advent of the Christian church. So I'm trying to understand what you're saying by that. And you're saying that they would never lump them together, but does not Josephus list the books of canon of his day? He's not saying.
Hold on. But the Mishnah also listed a certain amount of books that were considered books that were mitamei yadayim, books that would impurify your hands. But that doesn't mean that they had one book that contained all these texts together. As a matter of fact, even today, like if you walk into a synagogue,
it's a collection. It's an anthology.
Right.
It's an anthology.
Like books that the court endorsed that could be studied apart from the Torah, because there's no debate whether the 5 books of Moses were divinely inspired. But the debate was, what other books could the court endorse to be edifying for Israel to get a picture of how God acted and reacted during the prophets? That's a different set of books that are not on the level of Torah. Now, why don't people make a distinction? I'm not sure why. Right?
Well, can I share one reason? It's what I said earlier. Mm-hmm. Isaiah says, "Thus saith the Lord." And unless you're going to say that's actually not Yahweh speaking there, and then you should just cast it out, because it's not going to be good for devotional use or covenantal, considerations or anything like that. If it's true, however, when he says, "Thus saith the Lord," that means Yahweh is still speaking through a prophet that day. And the thing is, Isaiah is not merely a repetition of everything in Torah. Let me give you a great example. I mentioned Jeremiah isn't either, and Jeremiah says, "I'll give you a new covenant."
Right.
So not only that there's a promise of a future covenant that I would say is clearly tied and linked around the Messiah, that is similar, that goes along with this concept of, I mentioned the Davidic covenant. There's progressive covenants. And so that's why people would lump them together in the sense of here's an anthology of the Hebrew scriptures that are actually from God himself, not just commentaries or something like that, rabbinical opinion.
So I don't think the issue is with what's written there. It's with how you interpret it. Most passages that say, thus says the Lord, you interpret as messianic, and I interpret it as just reiterating a Torah principle that's non-messianic. For example, the notion of a messianic age or a Messiah or a resurrection of the dead, all these concepts are developed ideas. Why would God endorse a prophet to speak about a developed idea that he didn't lay down in the Torah when God in the Torah himself says, if a prophet brings to you a new idea, take him on and stone him. In other words, it can't contradict itself. Now,
it doesn't say a new idea. I don't think it says that. It's something that contradicts what's already written, or something that's false that doesn't come to pass. It's not just something new, because by that understanding, Moses wasn't around when Abraham existed, and yet he's the final author, depending on how you look at it, of things that are happening during Adam's day. Everything was not revealed to Adam in Genesis 3. There are some things revealed. Genesis 9, everything is not revealed there to Noah. Even during the blessing, the Yahweh says he's going to shower upon Abraham and his family. Everything's not revealed all at once there. He doesn't really even tell Abraham how he's going to do it. He just says, through you, I'll bless all the families of the earth. It's not actually exactly clear exactly how it's going to. Now, Abraham has an idea of how it's going to happen, and, he takes matters into his hands, all that. But I'm saying, everything's not all at once, and so that's why the concept of Yahweh speaking through his prophets throughout this time, and I wasn't saying thus saith the Lord as a way to just sneak in messianic ideas. There's other things in there, because I think that phrase appears 7,000 times. I forget how much, but very frequently. There's all kinds of things. There's things that are being reiterated. There's prophecies for the future. I mean, for example,
things that you may think are. Wait, hold on.
Well, when Cyrus is called by name, that's not messianic in the sense of it points to who Israel's Messiah will be. Yet Cyrus is called by name in some of the prophetic scriptures, and I think that that's important to recognize. Look, Cyrus is here called by name as this person who will come, but it's not messianic. But yet it's not something that happened in the Torah either. You know what I'm saying?
So different things. If the prophet is telling you about a character who happens to exist and is involved in Israel's exile and redemption, then that's clearly not adding to the Torah, because it's speaking to them about that specific time in their time of turmoil. In other words, it's not adding any commandments, any metaphysical ideas to the Torah. Now, the statement, thus says the Lord, is not the problem. Is what you're saying the Lord is telling you, i.e., he's developing these metaphysical ideas that don't have their root in Torah. That's the problem the Jew has with Christianity. A Christian will interpret Isaiah 53 or any portion of the prophets they consider pointing to the Messiah as in some way foretelling the coming of Jesus. But the Jew could read it in Hebrew and in English and in any other language and interpret it differently and still believe that the notion of progressive revelation doesn't exist. So I don't think it's a conflict of interest here. That what you think is pointing to the future and adding new metaphysical concepts, I believe that it's actually pointing to the past and reiterating and amplifying the initial message in Torah. So only because a prophet says, thus says the Lord, doesn't mean the Lord is telling you something new. I believe every time it says that, it's just reiterating what the Lord initially said, because the prophet could never add any new concept, either legal or metaphysical, that doesn't appear in the Torah as instructional to the Jewish people.
Right. Well, check it out. Let's that's good stuff. We kind of went off, but I think it's still an interesting discussion. But let's come back. Let's try to come back a little. Let's go back a little bit to Kabbalah to make sure we at least.
Sure, no problem.
So I think what we said so far, because we could talk again, and that's interesting stuff, but I'm just realizing our time here, and there's a bunch of stuff on Kabbalah we never got to. So Kabbalah, and one I mentioned that I do want to get back to. So guys, we're trying to transition. We kind of went off, but I think it was an interesting discussion, and people in the live chat seem to appreciate it. But coming back, what about this concept within Kabbalah where the Shekinah is understood to be this female aspect of God, and that actually some of the things that you do, mitzvah, I think, could be almost encouraging the female and the male aspect of God to combine again, almost like some kind of divine copulation.
Sure.
Yeah, can you explain this? Because this is highly problematic, I think.
I mean, there's nothing to explain. I mean, this is, if you ask 3 Kabbalists a question, you'll get 5 or 6 different opinions. There's no monolithic understanding to any of this. So the average Kabbalist will deny this and say, oh, well, that's not what it really means, right? There's many instances that teaches from this layout of the tree of life of the Sefirot, that God has a penis, God has a vagina, and there's a female aspect and a male aspect, and that is what makes the world go around. God, but it's what can I tell you? It's out there.
Well, can you speak about Shekinah, though? Because Shekinah is a biblical word, and I would say a biblical concept.
Yeah, but Shekinah just means with the dwelling of God.
Yes.
Or it's like the notion of Mishkan. It's not necessarily a title for God or an aspect or an emanation necessarily of God. What the Torah itself says in Deuteronomy, I believe 29 verse 28, that the secret things that are ambiguous, things that we don't understand, things that seem mystical, that these things are for God and only what He's revealed to us is for us and our children to do. So it's better not even to get involved in this. And I know this is why you're having this show, to in some way push people away from ever being contaminated with these ideas. But they're out there. But I'll tell you, the average Jew does not walk around teaching that God has a penis, even though there are Kabbalistic texts that teach this. They've been refined throughout the years. Many people don't study the Zohar straight through. I mean, they'll filter it through the ideas of the Arizal or the Baal Shem Tov, or later rabbis who made Kabbalah popular. And their students virtually all have different interpretations of what the Zohar was trying to say.
That's why you've got to be 40 years old before you can study the Kabbalah, don't you know?
Right. So that's the opinion of one rabbi. The Rashba held like that. But those in the Hasidic movement, I mean, they teach Kabbalah to children. I mean, Chabad has a whole cartoon series called Kabbalah Tunes, for children.
What?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Not that they're teaching this notion of,
I was gonna say,
God.
Does this cartoon get graphic?
No, what? I mean,
and now, boys and girls, the 10th emanation.
Right. Well, Kabbalah, there's a lot of beautiful concepts within Kabbalah. The word that we have to get used to saying is optional. That these are things that are optional to believe. In other words, again, the Torah never endorsed any further writings. It only lays down the law, and it says that God either blesses you or curses you on the basis of keeping or not keeping this law. And anything else, whether it's the Book of Jubilees, whether it's even the New Testament, if it brings you back to Torah, if it makes you a better servant to the Almighty, then it's great, and it's edifying. And this is what the rabbis had in mind when they canonized Tanakh. When they canonized what Christians call the Old Testament, they were trying to equip Israel with a historical record of how bad their forefathers stumbled in history, so they wouldn't do the same thing. I mean, they never expected people to run with it and create new ideas and this and that, right? They knew that the Torah was the basis. It's not always good to just toss a whole movement under the bus, right, and say that it's all nonsensical, because in many cases you make it more attractive to people when you do that. But if you reinforce what's the core, what's the base, what's source material, and the answer is Torah to all those questions, then it doesn't matter what people are studying, because they're always going to say any of this cannot either add or take away from the Torah. Now, I'm not against the notion of the Messiah, and I'm not against the notion of the resurrection of the dead, but I don't think that God requires me to believe in a heaven, or to believe in a hell, or to believe in a Messiah, or to believe in a resurrection of the dead, because all he said in Torah was keep my commandments. That's it. And in terms of the metaphysical, he says that what is secret is for me, and what's revealed already to you, i.e. in what we call the Pentateuch, is for us and our children to do. So, I mean, it's really so relieving to understand it like that. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that the books of the prophets are not important, or the books of the writings are not important.
No, I understand.
They're very edifying, but I'm for amplifying Torah.
Right.
I'm for breaking down a systematic theology so people stay grounded. Because, good.
Well, no, let me just try to jump in here. So I understand what you're saying. The Torah is Korah. It's core to everything. Mm. But you said something interesting. You said about heaven and hell. So you find it fulfilling to attempt to keep Torah in this life, but do you have a concept and you believe of the afterlife yourself?
Well, first we have to understand why were our patriarchs keeping Torah, and why were those in the wilderness keeping Torah when they weren't promised the heaven and hell? Why would someone want to do the right thing if someone's not promised a mansion in heaven or a fiery pit?
That's a question of motivation.
Right, okay.
Forget about motivation. I'm asking you about the ontology.
No. Right. Well,
Does what do you think exists in the afterlife?
it's connected
According,
to this. I mean, I
okay,
think that they did good for the sake of doing good, and that's the best reason to want to do the right thing. Now, I personally believe in a heaven and a hell. Why? Because I think that for God to be just, it would be unjust that Mother Teresa should have the same outcome as Hitler, right? In other words, life's too short, and there's many good people who suffer, and there's many bad people who get by, and for God to be just, he would have to incorporate divine justice
okay.
when judging.
So Yahweh's justice would demand some form of, rewards and punishment system in the afterlife.
Right, but being that the Torah was given to a nation, it was given to an agrarian society, any notion of salvation, of redemption mentioned in Torah, it's not talking about a heavenly salvation or any metaphysical concept. It's talking about earth. It's talking about peace. It's talking about rain in its season. It says that you will see your children grow old. That was all the reward that he spoke about in Torah. Now, there are some ambiguous statements that I could see where people ran with it, like the notion of being written in a book. What does that mean? I'm not sure. It doesn't explain it, right? Now, people ran with that notion. And again, I believe in these later developed ideas like heaven and hell, but I don't think that the Torah requires me to do so, especially to want to be ethical. In other words, with the average, let's say, missionary on the streets, when they're trying to get you saved, the first thing they tell you, if you die today, do you know where you're going to go? But instead of saying, look at yourself, look at your community, right? You're not keeping God's commandments. And the result of not keeping those commandments is what appears in Deuteronomy 28, 29, in Leviticus 26. In other words, within every command is bundled in a punishment. So do good for the sake of doing good. Uh-huh.
So do you believe you'll exist in some continuous way where you're conscious in for example, a perfected, resurrected body in the afterlife? Or do you believe that in some way you'll be dwelling with Yahweh's presence in some way? What do you think?
I surely hope so, but
do you think that's a concept that's rooted in Judaism?
Okay, there's a lot of things that are Jewish and not necessarily from the Torah. So is it rooted in Judaism? Yes, absolutely. Is it rooted in Torah? No. It seems that if the Almighty wanted us to focus so much on the afterlife, like people do nowadays, he would have mentioned something about it in Torah, but it seems like he wants us to do good for the sake of doing good. And that's really what I try to give over. Especially because it's not so easy to condemn someone or shun them when you don't have a heaven, when you don't have a hell. If all we have is here and now, it behooves us to work together with the people we have here, instead of being too heavenly good that we're no earthly good. This is actually the birth of jihad. With the notion of heaven and hell has created the idea that this world is disgusting and I'm going to live for some paradise is going to offer me 70 virgins and that I just want to leave this place. And I don't think this is what Torah was trying to do. But
but I hear what you're saying, Asher. But the Islamic conception of paradise is pretty easy to see that that's from the mind of a man. Ever flowing, rivers of wine that you can drink without getting drunk, and you're deflowering virgins, yet they remain eternally perpetual in a virginal state, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like, that sounds pretty man-centered.
Well, even the notion of living forever is pretty man-centered, and the Torah doesn't mention it.
Unless you say, like the psalmist said, whom and I have in heaven but you. And see, that is the emphasis of a theocentric afterlife in which God dwells with his people and his people dwell with him. It's not about your own kind of getting your thing on and your own personal wish fulfillment. It's being with the one whom you were made to enjoy. And that's a classic Christian concept. The first question of the Westminster Confession says, what is the chief end of man? And it's to know God.
It's a great idea. I mean, I wish the Torah would have mentioned it. That's the thing. It's a great idea. Well, there's a lot of ideas, metaphysical ideas, that I believe in that the Torah doesn't mention, but I won't say that the Torah teaches.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. That's clearly theocentric. And that's sort of the center of the whole thing, centered on the person of Yahweh. And so there's a beauty about dwelling with him forever. But it's not a carnal delight situation that you have in the Christian afterlife. That's why I was curious. I'm
not disagreeing with you, by the way.
I'm
just very careful in being Torah-based. And many rabbis are. And I believe in the oral law, and I believe in the Talmud and the Mishnah. But I always lay down a systematic theology for people to understand how I got there, everything has to stem from the Torah. The Torah is the basis. And if you view religion like that, you will never stray. And you will always feel grounded. In other words, I really hope reincarnation is true. Right? I mean, the Torah doesn't teach reincarnation. Wait, hold on.
Hold on.
Sure.
You do. Because, see, that's something in Kabbalah that I thought you would have a problem with.
No, hold on. No. I'm saying but that I wish it's true, but the Torah doesn't teach it, though. So the difference between me and a Kabbalist, like he would say Torah teaches, and then he'll bring down a notion of Gilgulim, of reincarnation. Okay? Of course, why do I want reincarnation to be true? It's because life is beautiful. And I want to come back and do it all over again. Like I said, I'm more earthly minded than I'm heavenly minded. And I think that God really cares more about how we treat each other than how we treat him. He wants us to really try to fix this world. Huh?
But isn't the center of the Torah, if we're going to talk about that, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength?
No.
Because you said you don't agree that that's the center of Torah.
No, I don't agree.
But why are the first two commandments, they don't start with how you treat people. They start with your vertical relationship with Yahweh first. So in the Decalogue, it begins clearly theocentric. In fact, the third commandment as well. I mean, they're all theocentric, but the first three commandments all have to do with Yahweh's glory and honor.
Wait, hold on.
So I'm curious. You're saying it's more about how we treat our neighbor, but that's secondary. It flows out of our relationship.
So, this, I think, is a preconceived notion because what Jesus himself says, that the most important commandment is to love God, the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. The Torah doesn't lay it down like that. The reason, in my opinion, at least, on why the first commandment is that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, is to show an act of love there, saying, look what I did for you. Now, listen to what I have to say. Not that we in some way believe in Torah because of God, but rather that we believe in God because of Torah. In other words, what he did for us, how these commandments work.
Prior to Torah, then. So why you're saying we believe in God? So why did Noah believe in God?
We don't know enough about Noah to even know what he believed in. But I'm saying it
can't be because of Torah, can it?
It doesn't say anything of what actually Noah believed.
Do you think the Torah was revealed in full prior to Sinai and Noah had it or something? And at Sinai, Yahweh just broke it out again?
I don't believe that Noah's relationship with God in any way resembles the relationship Moses had or even the relationship Abraham had. We don't know much about Noah. All we know is that he obeyed God in terms of building like an ark, but he really did nothing to try to save people around him. I mean, Judaism doesn't really have a great light on Noah. When it says he was righteous, it says really that he was righteous in his generation, but the people in his generation weren't too spectacular. You know, this is why I try not to build any metaphysical concept around the people who didn't have the Torah, who didn't have any revelation.
But I think you're maybe missing what I was saying. You were saying we believe in God because of Torah, so I'm giving you a counter hypothetical. Well, it's actually not hypothetical. I'm giving you a counterpoint, really, that says prior to Torah, why are people believing in Yahweh? How did Enoch walk with Yahweh?
It wasn't the same notion. Hold on.
He didn't have Torah, did he?
It was a different God. I mean, it might as well have been. In other words...
Wait, is it a different God? What do you mean by that?
Like for the same reason that you consider Allah a different God than the God from the Bible, correct? Because it's what a God expects from you that defines him. God was defined to us on Mount Sinai by giving us his instructions. Now, the first person who really got it, who entered the covenant, was Abraham. I mean, it wasn't Enoch. It wasn't Noah. These people just did what God told them, but they didn't really emulate any of God's properties, you know, or personality traits, like being merciful, that we see Abraham arguing with God to save the people.
Yeah, but he also kicked out his wife that he impregnated and the baby in the desert.
Right.
I mean,
God endorsed this, by the way.
They all failed. They all failed to keep Yahweh's holy standard. And that's why it says in Genesis that Abraham believed in God. It was counted to him righteousness. Not he kept Torah and was keyed in righteousness.
But we don't know all the stories behind why he actually kicked out Hagar, but it seems that God endorsed this. And he even said that Hagar's child would be almost a donkey of a man. And I'm just saying it's...
Right, but the angel saved their lives. So clearly the angel saved their lives. By the way, and that's... The angel shows up there in Genesis. I mean, you mentioned earlier about angels, but the angel shows up there and saves their life and points them to water.
Right.
Remember that?
But you're still reading into the story in terms of God being angry at his behavior. I mean, really.
Well, I didn't say that, but I'm saying I don't find it merciful to kick out a little boy into the desert.
Because we don't know the story. We don't know the whole story. I mean, if you want to go deeper, I mean, the rabbis claim to have a tradition where that he married Hagar again after Sarah died, and her name was Keturah. I'm just saying, in terms of what's not there, that we shouldn't really build on any notion that someone could know who the true God is without having a glimpse of what he expects from us. In other words, anyone could claim to have created you. Anyone could claim to have the power to eradicate your enemies. But it's only a good God that's worthy of being followed, that just by emulating him, your society, your surroundings would improve. In other words, it's not a coincidence that the Almighty doesn't punish the Israelites, but only till after he lays down the law, because they don't know any better. He wanted to make himself lovable to them.
Oh, hold on. He punished Sodom and Gomorrah, and they didn't know any better. They didn't have Torah.
So there's an understanding that every human has a basic sense of morality. A basic sense. I mean, so when I just Sodom and Gomorrah, like he punished.
It's written on the Gentiles' hearts. He just, I mean, with the flood, whether you think it's global or local, he's still destroying some folks. You know what I'm saying? At Tower of Babel, he's judging. Now it's not destruction
Honestly,
in the same way.
If someone's murdering or acting cruel, just like those from Sodom and Gomorrah, I mean, that's what it says in Ezekiel on why he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, because of cruelty.
Well, it says they're mistreating the poor, but right. I mean, hold on. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to understand. You hold to Ezekiel's commentary or understanding of things about Genesis, even though Ezekiel's not Torah.
Genesis itself says why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. In other words, they were trying to rape the angels. It was still a form of cruelty. I'm just reiterating a notion that Ezekiel happens to bring down, but I'm not using Ezekiel as an authority of why Sodom and Gomorrah or even Cain was punished when there was no commandment to murder. Now, the rabbis understand this as the 7 laws of Noah. I believe that these 7 laws were developed by the court to adjudicate Gentiles living on Jewish lands. But what this is teaching us is that there's a basic sense of morality, that God could still adjudicate you on a metaphysical level, i.e., like not with a court, which is how punishments were later meted out, a standard that he would hold you against if you didn't meet, with Torah or not. In other words, Torah is not there to make you good. It's there to make good people better. It's there to polish you up. In my opinion, I follow God because of Torah. I don't follow Torah because of God. Why? Because anyone could claim to have the truth. Anyone, I mean, look at all of those that follow the silliest belief systems and say, my God is true. But
right.
And my God is true because of how he behaves, on how it actually, his words have civilized humanity, not because of who he claims to be. So I'm not sure what the discussion is on.
And in a second, guys, I'm going to open up the comments. I'd love to hear your comments for Rabbi Asher Meza, who I got a lot of compliments from listeners prior to this discussion. Like I said, on Twitter, my man Alan Rule was like, "Oh, that's my favorite rabbi." I was like, "Oh, really? How come?" He's like, "Well, he's not hostile, like certain other guys, and you can have a conversation." And I think if you watch Asher Meza's stuff, he's always energetic and knowledgeable, and yet you can have a conversation with him. So I appreciate these kinds of dialogues. I think these are good and important. And so much love again to you, and I'm glad you came on. And I want to try to give the audience a chance. So guys, ask some questions, and I'll see what works from the live chat, and I'll ask Rabbi Asher Meza, and I think that's some real good stuff. So final word on Kabbalah before we take some questions from the audience. Going back, this is kind of our conversation circles, but that's all right. Final word on Kabbalah, my man.
I'm not someone who walks around saying that Kabbalah is necessarily evil, that any notion is at the outset wrong, right? Anything that pulls you away from God, anything that develops new ideas and requires you to believe it, and furthermore encourages you to shun people from your group, to exclude people if they don't follow the interpretation of your local Kabbalists, that is what's destructive. That's what causes division. If anything you study, whether if it's the Quran, if the Quran's bringing you back to the 5 books of Moses, if it's getting you to keep God's commandments and to be an ethical person, then it's good. Now, the way, again, I like to classify it, is texts that are optional to believe. That means they could be good, they could be bad. They were ultimately developed by man. Nothing outside the 5 books of Moses could speak on the metaphysical. The metaphysical began in Genesis and ended in Deuteronomy, and that's it. And anything else was on a lesser form of inspiration. In other words, the Almighty never endorsed new books to be written. The rabbis...
So in essence, your rejection of Kabbalah has to do with your rejection of things being absolutely authoritative outside the Torah.
Absolutely.
Which I hear you on that. But it seems like in some of your videos, you did more detailed work about, they're sexualizing God and things like that versus just saying as a presupposition because it's outside of Torah. I reject
Kabbalah
it.
is more than the Sefirot. I mean, it's more than the 10 emanations of God.
Right.
There's so many subcategories, like the book called the Tanya that speaks about the Jewish soul. That the Jewish soul is, it says, Helek Eloka Mimal Mamish, that it's a piece of God himself, right? And the Gentile soul comes from the evil forces, from the Sitra Achra. Now, there's many mystical ideas called Kabbalah nowadays that have nothing to do with the 10 spheres. There's also something called Simsum, that God in some way contracted himself.
Yeah, the contraction,
right.
and has
so
the
these
universe
are all principles
inside himself and all this.
But these are all principles that contradict the teachings of the Rambam. I mean, the Rambam wrote the book Mor Nevuchim, which is the guide for the perplexed, and he attacks all these ideas. Now, again, this is solely Rambam. I mean, he brings down a lot of Plato, a lot of Aristotle. The Torah really doesn't tackle these concepts, and this is why I don't necessarily consider them idolatrous just because the Torah doesn't mention it. If someone wants to believe that God has a body, well, I mean, if someone reads the Torah straight through, I mean, someone could come to the conclusion that God may have a body. I don't believe God has a body. The Rambam laid down great philosophical arguments on why it actually hurts the belief system to believe that he's corporeal. But again, if the Torah does not condemn it, I'm not going to call it heretical nor idolatrous, although something could be non-heretical and non-idolatrous and still be wrong.
All right, let's turn to questions from the audience. Shout out to Lily R. from Brooklyn with the Super Chat. Shout out to D-New all the way from Canada with the Super Chat. That gives us, I think, 12. So if we were going to do a freestyle today, which we've got about 20 minutes left to do, I think we'd need 38 more. You guys know the rules. If we get to 100 viewers on the discussion, I do a freestyle. And if we get to 50 in the Super Chat, I do a freestyle. So we didn't get to 100. We got to 90 some. So we got pretty close. I think we got right up to the mark. I think at one point we had 97. We're at 80 in the mid 80s right now. But anyways, we got some great comments from the live stream. Now, if you could, let's do kind of a rapid fire because it's fun to kind of like, you and I have been going back and forth, but the more you can kind of do a quick version, no one's going to be like, hey, it's a quick version. Quick is better because then it's funner because we can bounce around and get more live stream questions if you're able to. So first one from Rox B. What is the price to be paid for breaking one of God's laws one time? So these are kind of going out into broader Judaism. But what's your quick response for that?
So there's only a handful of commandments that the Torah lays down a personal punishment for. I mean, most punishments brought down in the Torah are on the national level. How many people are actually breaking laws that God has to chastise Israel with exile and a prophetic intervention? In terms of the personal, it always calls for repentance. Sometimes it calls for animal sacrifice. I mean, sometimes it calls for a meal offering. I think the Torah is there to get you to think in the collective that we're all part of a team here. We're all moving towards a greater goal. And this is why I don't think it deals too much on personal sin and on personal celestial intervention.
Okay. The Synagogue says, I'm not going to necessarily respond. I'm just going to let you answer, by the way. So that's why I make it quick. The Synagogue says, so when Isaiah says, thus saith the Lord, is he lying?
No.
Quick response?
He's definitely not lying. Isaiah is speaking to a certain people at a certain time. I mean, really, when Isaiah was prophesying, the kingdom of Judah was surrounded by the northern kingdom and the kingdom of Assyria. If you study the book of Isaiah or any of the books of the prophets, you always must study it with its historical counterpart. So Isaiah would have appeared in the book of 2 Chronicles. This is why these books were never meant to be studied alone. You always have to study it again with its historical counterpart to understand what Isaiah is speaking about, who he's speaking to, and what calamity he's trying to prevent.
Gerard Perry, does he believe in Sheol? It sounds like he doesn't.
Well, the word Sheol, or Sheol in Hebrew, just means the grave or the pit. It doesn't mean hell. And the word Gehenna also doesn't mean hell. The word Gehenna in Hebrew is Gei Behinom. It's actually a place outside the walls of Jerusalem where people used to burn garbage. The notion of hell does not appear in the Jewish scriptures at all.
First and last says, Deuteronomy 18:15-22 says, God will raise a prophet after Moses. We are to listen to him or God will require it of us. Does Rabbi not accept when clearly this will be after Torah? I think they're saying, it sounds like this guy's after Torah. But you don't. Go ahead. The question's on the
Okay.
screen. I don't know if. Go ahead.
All right. So, well, the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 18 says that when you begin to emulate the nations that you've displaced, I will raise up for you a prophet. In other words, everything we do in Judaism has to have a commandment in the Torah to justify it. So what commandment in the Torah tells us to listen to prophets? Only Deuteronomy chapter 18. If Deuteronomy chapter 18 is not telling us to listen to prophets in general, then we have no commandment to listen to prophets. And then it goes further. It says, and the prophet who does not speak what I command, i.e., the notion just went from singular to plural. It's speaking about prophets in general. Now, if you believe that Jesus is a prophet, then it wouldn't be excluding him. But if this is not speaking about prophets in general, we have no commandment to listen to prophets or await prophets in Jewish history.
Dennis says, according to him, what will happen to Christians in the end? Are you an annihilationist?
Again, I don't believe in an end. The Torah doesn't speak of an end. It lays down a formula of disobedience equals prophetic intervention. If we don't heed prophetic intervention, it equals exile. Once we repent, he brings us back and establishes our former glory, and this will happen again and again, and we may even have 1,000 temples 1,000 years from now. In other words, it doesn't speak of an end or an end of days. Now, the notion of later days does appear in Torah. Later days could be 20 years from now, 100 years from now. The notion of eternity, leolam, in Hebrew doesn't necessarily mean eternity. It just means for a very long time. These are notions that were developed in the exile to mystify anything that had a practical meaning in the 5 books of Moses.
Okay, Dennis also asked, why don't Jews institute sacrifice today?
Because there's a commandment in the Torah that we're not allowed to sacrifice outside of the temple. That's why. Can we build another temple? We could absolutely build another temple if Jews would get their act together. That's why we're not allowed to sacrifice. But once we have another temple, we're commanded to bring sacrifices.
So Joshua says, do you have Levites in your synagogue? If not, how do you get represented to God, and how do you perform blood sacrifice?
So the Levites aren't necessarily the ones who perform sacrifices. There's a sect within the Levites called Kohanim. The priests come from the tribe of Levi, but the priests are descendants of Aaron, who was also a Levite. But the Levites who exist today, post-Aaron, are the servants in the temple. It means they're the ones who clean up, like who stoke the fires, but they're not the ones involved in animal sacrifices. But yes, in the Jewish world, there's tons of Levites or tons of priests of Kohanim. Any Jew that you see out there, or most Jews with the last name Cohen, means that he's a priest. The word Cohen means priest. There's many Jews out there, I'm sure you probably know a few with the last name Levi. It means that they're from the tribe of Levi. Typically, when they're called up to the Torah, you call the Cohen first, and you call the Levi, and then with the Israel. But they exist, and they're ready for service.
Mark Cleveland says, if Yahweh asked you about your sin, what would you say?
That I repent. That's all we could do. That's all he requires from us. In other words, we don't endorse the notion that because Adam sinned, we have this unwashable mark. No, that we have an opportunity to fix that. Every day, today, you can repent and start anew. It says, the prophet, that if your sins were as red as scarlet, I'll make them white as snow. All you have to do is open your heart to God.
Isaiah 92 asks, what are your thoughts on Genesis, where God says he created man in our image? Do you think this shows a plurality in God's character?
Well, I believe it's in Isaiah chapter 6, it says, who shall go for us? That's when Isaiah stands up and he says, choose me, I will go. Now, in that instance, who's he speaking to? He's speaking to the angels who are around him. So it doesn't necessarily have to speak about some complex unity of God. Not that I'm saying that the Torah is against the idea. There's enough in the Torah to tell us that God has no image, that on the mountain you saw no form. I'm not here to condemn someone who wants to believe that God may have parts, just like I don't really condemn a Kabbalist who believes there's 10 emanations of God. As long as they're not contradicting an actual command in Torah, I don't see it as such a big dividing issue. Even in the Jewish world, like people exclude people just because they have a different understanding on the complexity of God. I don't believe God has parts, and I hold to the teachings of the Rambam that people like that have to be educated correctly, right? But
I got you. Well, just so you know, as a Christian who's Trinitarian, I don't hold that God has parts either, in the sense of compartments or something like that. It's not parts, it's persons. You know what I'm saying? As far as if we talked about the distinctions among the members of the Trinity. Michelle Marie asks, what do you believe about Melchizedek?
Torah doesn't say much about him. The Medrash, the legend, says that he was the son of Shem. Torah says that he was king of Salem. It doesn't teach us enough about it for me to have anything other than conjecture. It says Abraham gave him a tenth of a bounty, but it doesn't say much, at least in Torah. Now, we know that Psalm 110 says you're a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. We don't know exactly what that's pointing to.
Got another one. Is the temple in the Torah, someone asks?
The temple is in the Torah. The notion of the Mishkan, the traveling sanctuary, is the Beit HaMikdash. Now, what the Mishkan was also called a Mikdash is what was there like during the time of King Solomon also. In other words, the temple that King Solomon built was the sanctuary with a stone base. In other words, not even Solomon could add new dimensions to the actual sanctuary. All he did was put it on a mount, make it more elaborate than with the initial Mishkan, but no measurements were changed in the diagrams or in the vessels or other pieces of furniture within it.
All right. Well, it's about time for me to do my freestyle. And so what we do is, to make apologetics fun again, at the end of certain shows, I'll do a freestyle about the show that day. So, what topics do I need to make sure I rap about? Asher Meza, Torah, synagogue, Messiah, what else? The Zohar, right?
Right.
Rambam. Help me out here, man. Help me out here.
Satan, dualism.
Shaitan, dualism.
Well, Shaitan is what the Muslims say, right? I mean, we say Satan.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I like doing that. It's sort of a cognate, and sometimes the cognates are fun. Maybe we can do Melchizedek, angel, Moses, covenant. What else did we talk about today? What is it? It's the spheres. Okay, go ahead.
So just let me add one idea. I'm not here to in some way try to contradict or challenge you in any way. I'm just trying to bring you a different perspective. As long as there's a different way of viewing a passage or a certain idea, automatically gets you not to push someone away. Because it could be a valid understanding of Scripture or of Torah. In other words, unlike, let's say, what Paul says, the Jews walk around with some sort of spirit of stupor or scales in their eyes. I mean, that's another extreme. I mean, that's not how I view Christians. I mean, I believe that people that I happen to disagree with are just malinformed. I don't believe they're evil. I don't believe you're evil. I mean, I honestly believe that you're here to learn, that you want to learn the truth, and you're willing to change as much as I'm willing to change, and as long as people sit down together and hear each other out, I mean, that's how we could progress on an ethical and even spiritual manner.
All right, this is the last question. I appreciate that. This is the last question. I'm only doing this because Jason Manning gave in the super chat. Much love on that. And after that, I will do the freestyle. So this is your rapid fire response. Can the rabbi please explain Isaiah 53 and how he answers it?
Sure. I believe that Isaiah 53 should be in some way called the Song of the Martyrs. Isaiah 46 refers to Isaiah himself as a servant. Now, all these portions are a bit ambiguous because Israel is also called the servant. I am not of the opinion that Isaiah 53 is speaking about Israel suffering, mainly because at that point in time, Israel hasn't suffered as a nation post-Torah. In other words, Isaiah was prophesying before the Babylonian exile. So I think it's speaking about how Israel always mistreats prophets and messengers that are sent to Israel. Now, if you believe that Yeshua was a messenger, then it wouldn't exclude him. But I think it's in particular speaking about Isaiah. Jewish tradition teaches that he was murdered by Manasseh, but it doesn't exclude Jeremiah, it doesn't exclude Ezekiel, it doesn't exclude anyone else, any righteous man that God continues to send. I mean, there's many rabbis like the Rambam who believes that prophecy never ended, nor should we think that prophecy ended, because the Torah never said it ended. Although there's statements in the Talmud that once the destruction of the temple occurred, prophecy was only given to crazy people and fools. But I believe there's prophets today who are still made to suffer by carrying that right message, right? And I think Isaiah 53 speaks to that whenever those who are wicked are presented with that correct message, those people are made to suffer. And those are the suffering servants of God.
All right. Any other things I need a freestyle about? Thank you for your answer. Israel. All right. Guys, there's some other great questions in here, but we cannot get to them all People are even suggesting other things I should freestyle about. Somebody wants me to freestyle about Metatron. All right, so when's your next live stream? Because maybe I can send a couple Christians your way, subscribe to your channel, and come in your live chat and try to proselytize.
Sure, no problem.
Since I say that half jokingly because I did visit your live stream recently, and you had some Christians in there bringing the good news, as it were. And
I welcome it, man. I mean, I love Christians trying to convert anyone because it shows like they care. And I think Jews should care as much to try to convert them as well. And I also try to convert Muslims also. I mean, we should be in the business of saying what's good for us is good for them, right? But unfortunately, most Jews nowadays don't preach what they practice. In other words, they keep it to themselves. But my show is Monday nights at 9:30. It's called Faith on the Line. Just go on my YouTube page, and then you could enter the show there, and I'll put a link to the Hangout, and we could dialogue. I love learning.
All right, Mark Cleveland says, bring him back, Vocab. I like him. So if we did something again, it sounds like you wanted to kind of do sort of a debate type thing. Now let me ask you this on the air: you wanted to debate Calvinism? No. I thought I misunderstood. I thought you wanted to debate Calvinism with me.
Your producer manager said, should we debate Calvinism? And I told him I'm not Christian. I mean,
I was confused on that too. Well, tell me what you were interested in, like having like more of a kind of debate-ish type of thing. I thought there was a couple topics you had in mind. Just throw them at me and I'll write them down.
I think the main topic is Jesus, although I don't think that he's like a huge stumbling block that keeps people away from Torah, just because there's many Messianics who keep Torah. Again, I'm still in the business of saying what's good for me is good for you, and I would like to help you sharpen your beliefs by converting to full Judaism and becoming an inheritor to every blessing that appears in the Torah.
Okay, so mainly like, is Jesus the promised Messiah, that type of thing?
Yeah.
All right. One person says one more time to ask, what is your YouTube channel again? One more time.
Just type in Rabbi Asher Meza on YouTube. But all my videos are on TorahJudaism.com. But my YouTube channel is actually /GOAsher023. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to do the freestyle. Now, check this out. We got each other's number and Skype so we can connect, and this is up to you right now because after the little freestyle, I'll end the show. So you have – we'll talk again after this, but for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to do this. You can hang on. We can talk afterwards or we can talk later. It's up to you, but it's time for me to freestyle. Thanks. Yeah, exactly. Hey, do you got any rhymes, bro?
No, man.
No? You don't have any, like aren't you bro, you don't have any, proselytizing to Christians rhymes or something like that?
I mean, I'll give you a beat. You want a beat?
Oh, you can beatbox.
No, I can't beatbox. I mean, I'm from the streets too, man. You know, like I'm.
That's what I'm saying. You might be secretly modest Yahoo.
Yeah, but not everyone from the streets is, musically inclined. I mean, I used to be a DJ, by the way, back in the day.
What? See?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I sing.
Yeah, he's not a cantor. When the beat comes on, you're not going to be able to hear it because you're on Skype, so you'd have to listen to you'd have to go on YouTube to hear it.
That's cool.
But all right, here we go, guys. I'm going to set up the beat. Gonna set up the beat now. Setting up the beat. Just give me a second, everybody here. Let's see. My man Jonathan just sent some new ones, so let me try some of these new beats I got. All right, let's see how they sound. Let me try this one first. Let's see how this sounds right here. Let's see. Oh, nice. Okay, that's gonna be the first beat, and then let me see what the second one's gonna be. That's nice. I like that. That's definitely gonna be the first one right there. Let me skip and see. Nah, I'm not gonna do that one today. Try this one instead. Okay, I'll start with that one. Alright, I'm gonna start with the rain beat. Okay guys, I'm getting set up here. You guys ready? Here we go! Yo. 1, 2, 3, 4, it's time to explore the core Torah. Yes, y'all, with Asher Meza. Grab the mic, begin to blaze. Yes, y'all, you guessing this, y'all. Today we discuss the Kabbalah plus Torah and Sodom and Gomorrah. So peep it out, y'all. Rockin' the beat, 1, 1, 2, 3. I'm a real MC. Isaiah 53 is the Messiah. JC, at least I believe it is. Go on and on for all of you kids. We're talking about pluralism and dualism. I represent Christ, I'm a Christian. So listen when I'm spitting. From here to all the angels. I don't like Kabbalah, I believe in angles. The text I spit from my necks. Yes, yes, y'all. You don't have a God who has sex. That's a liar. I know the truth about the Shekinah. Yes, y'all, I worship the Messiah. And now I discuss the divine. Jeremiah 29 spoke about the new covenant. He's the one whose government be upon his shoulder. Isaiah 7, 9, and 6 is like a heavy boulder. Messianic prophecy, let me rock the beat. 1, 2, 3, mic check. Rochelle Marie asked about Melchizedek. He had no father or mother, metaphorically speaking. So I grabbed the mic with the skilled Puerto Rican. That's Asher from FLA. Hello, how you doing? We will discuss Job. Hey, not only Joba, but Noah. We also discussed the man known as Moa. I met Moshe, I met Moses. This discussion, I suppose it was like a dozen roses because it was a love letter. Keep this out now, I'm not about the cheddar. Make the beat hot like a sweater in the middle of summer. Not dumb and dumber, not Jim Carrey vocabulary. Rock the mic, I'm not legendary. Discuss Mizah, discuss Torah, discuss the Jews in the news in Israel, yeah. Discuss the fall, discuss other stuff. This was kind of dumpy, even if it was kind of rough. Kind of a good conversation, a good dialogue. We discussed stuff and jumped around like a frog. Hip-hop Messiah, yes y'all rock the beat. I mentioned Jeremiah, Isaiah, and plus Daniel. And Manual will give you all the manual. I follow the law like the way Paul did. That means Jesus Christ, he kept it, kids. Yes, y'all, this beat is the bomb. I'm not an angel, I'm not Metatron. I'm not Megatron, not a Decepticon. But I'm out and out, I transform. On and on, peep this, I rock this. Hello, how you doing? I'm not Chewbacca or Han Solo. I'm on my bolo. You know I like some G.I. Joe. We discussed the 10 spheres. I love Yahweh, but him who I fear. We gotta fear him, why is that? He made us all and he can take it back. Like I said, good dialogue. We discussed the rabbi, we discussed the synagogue. We went real far. We discussed stuff like the Zohar. What else did we discuss? Let me think. We discussed about the words that were written with ink upon the vellum or the papyrus. God tells the truth, he's not no liar. He's not a virus, but the sin is. It crept in Genesis 3 and polluted the kids of Adam and Eve. This is what I believe. Jesus the Christ, he's the one I receive. Yes, indeed, and now I am free. Keep this out now, sticking to M-E-Z-A. That's Asher Meza. Yes, y'all, that's the end. Let me say, bruh. Alright, guys, we're going to do one more quick freestyle, and then that's the end. You guys have been great. We're going to... oh, my bad, bro. It rhymed. My bad. Help me out, then. Help me. Oh. Jersey, Columbia. My bad, bro. The thing is, someone told me, I think Asher Meza is Puerto Rican. My bad, bro. So, that... I won't... Alright, sorry, much love to all the Boricuas in the house, but we're talking Colombia, not PR. Alright, this is the last freestyle because Roxby, you hooked it up. And this is the end of the show, everybody. This is 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Brand new beat from Jonathan Soko. Here we go. Great discussion today. Alright, let's see what else is on my little topic. Oh, name some other things you want me to discuss on this final freestyle. You got any others, bro? Any others, Asher Meza? Well, that makes it funner, but you can make it whatever, bro. Good. Okay. Yes, we were. That's a good start. Hey, if you come up with anything else, say it in my ear. Oh, I have you down, so good thing I was saying what you're saying. Guys, he's in my ear, but I know you didn't hear him because my bad. But I relayed what you were saying. Okay, all right, here we go. 3 and 2 and 1 last freestyle for the evening. Nice beat. It's a nice beat right there. Yes, indeed. Into the show, let us paint the picture. Discussing with the rabbi divinely inspired scripture. So I hit ya with the words of the prophets. Prophets I respect, I expect they prophesied about the one who is coming, most deaf, no doubt. Peep this out as we paint this scene. We're discussing Deuteronomy 18. Know what I mean? It says there's gonna be a king, a prophet, and some other things who will speak the God word. Peep this out and you better observe. But you can't keep the law perfectly. The Messiah did, that's what I believe, see. Receiving, this is the tradition. What else do we discuss? I'm a born again Christian. Got a new heart, now I'm on a new mission. Like Jeremiah said, to peep this I listen. When they say, thus saith the Lord. And that's the truth when I hit the record button, not frontin'. Peep this, let me tell ya something. I do believe in original sin, but not the spheres, even if this are 10. Even an emanation called Shekinah, that's kinda whack, so let me find the true concept. That means God's imminent glory. From Malachi to Genesis is a story. Don't ignore the prophetic revelation. Jesus the Christ, he brought the salvation. He is the Lamb, he is the Ram, then the one and the only. So now y'all know me. Speaking to Asher Meza, I'm Vocab Malone. He's thrice holy, 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 holy. So give me the cozy, because I'm not quite there yet. Never could I even get. That's why I turn to Messiah for my sin. If my good works are like spit or spittle, I need much more than a hospital or a doctor. I need to be resurrected. Peep it, I'm not a mobster, but I'm Italian. So look at my mustache. I rap over the beat. It's ill boom bap. So mic check 1 2. What's up, D New? And the rest of y'all, I'm dealing dope like Rick Ross. I see Mark Cleveland. I see David Doss. Who else do I see? I see Adam T. I also see the man D-O to the U to the G in the live chat. You see, I'm Vocab Malone. Peace out. 1 2 3. Alright, y'all, it's been a great show. Thank you very much to Rabbi Asher Meza coming in today. And be sure to check out the show again Thursday, everybody, when I'm going to have Frank Turek on discussing the concept of stealing from God. I think you're going to definitely want to come and peep this out. This is going to be a fantastic show, so don't go anywhere. Thursday, Stealing from God. And be sure to check out facebook.com/Vocab Malone, because I'm still dropping the final episodes of Exploring Islam, and you also want to peep those out. Great